Chapter 18. Ahsoka Tano felt peace flow through every inch of her being, from Montreal tip to toes and everything in between. She tasked her breathing, a rhythmic cadence of deep inhales and exhales as she felt her spirit drawn into the realm of the Force itself. Slowly opening her eyes, she saw herself, her corporeal self, kneeling before her, and let herself drift in the openness of the slowed currents of the Force. Splaying her arms wide with outstretched fingers, she sought to let those currents course through them, adding her own peaceful intentions to the fold through thought alone. Within seconds, she felt a gentle wake, an eddying effect as Kowani reached out clumsily to grasp her hand. Ahsoka gently willed the Mirialan's hand closer to her own, grabbing her wrist firmly. The perception of movement was as welcome to Ahsoka within the realm of the Force as it was discombobulating to Kowani. "You make this look so easy," Kowani whispered into Ahsoka's mind. "Will I ever get the hang of it?" "Patience, Ani. It takes years of practice, but you're advancing well beyond the few months we've been working on it," Ahsoka said gently in return. "If only you were a quicker study with the saber," she finished, smiling as she looked deep into the spirit form of her pupil. Her body translucent as her conscious mind and her subconscious thought melded into a form of cohesion. Remember, focusing on keeping your eyes closed is easier. See with your thoughts, with your mind rather than your eyes, especially here. Ahsoka waited patiently as Kowani struggled with the suggestion, but her eventual release of tension and prideful smile showed her progress. "I've been working on that specifically," Kowani added with another whisper, her voice wavering as she heard herself. She attempted to shake her head in some minor form of self-condemnation, but was only rewarded with a dizzying sensation that threatened to return her to her mortal self. Ahsoka offered no insight or reprimand. She needs to figure this out, she thought. "That could take a while," Zar said, snapping Ahsoka out of her observation. She turned to see the spirit form of her symbiotic companion. In his majestic purple-skinned nakedness, sit cross-legged aside both herself and Kowani. "What could take a while? And where the hell have you been?" Kowani asked, almost letting her concentration slip again. "Meditating, Ani, as you now are," Zara responded. "You're improving, I see," he added his observation. "You're still with us, and your mortal self isn't spewing sickle over the cargo bay." Kowani felt the beginnings of the compliment die into the jab she knew was coming. "Zar, it is you that I think we should seek," Kowani began, ignoring the slight and following through with her earlier intention. "We've run into dead-end, strong-handed resistance and far too many questions in your absence." She spoke from the heart, surprising herself with the truth of her statement and her focus on not turning the Zeltran into a spiritual mystic. "The three of us." She couldn't find the right word, just flow. She finished by concentrating on their surroundings and their reason for being there. "We need you, Zar. I need you." She struggled with the words, not for content, but for the emotion they elicited. Ahsoka, nodding her head with pride, could not have phrased that more appropriately. She remained silent, observing Kowani's initiative. "You are as much a part of this family as we are." Ahsoka knew Kowani was speaking from the heart. "You were instrumental in helping me learn Mandoa, not to mention your assistance with my saber forms," Kowani continued. Zar had nothing to say, only staring off into the distance of the Force void, his wide, lidless eyes blank. "Where have you been?" Kowani finally asked. "I didn't know you felt so strongly, Ani." Zar stammered out the words, twisting them awkwardly through lack of experience. He assumed complete and utter lack of experience. "I am sorry if I have done a poor job expressing my appreciation for your efforts, but more importantly, that of your place among us," Kowani responded. "No apology is necessary, Ani. I know of your appreciation and will continue assisting when and where possible." He paused for a moment, considering his own truth. "Something is transpiring within the Force itself, Ani." His words trailed off as they left him, leaving a baleful silence between the three of them. "I have felt it, Zar." Ahsoka spoke up, admitting aloud a deep suspicion she hadn't even wanted to admit. "What does that even mean?" Kowani asked. confused and slightly upset with herself over lack of comprehension. "It means that something is changing, Ani," Ahsoka began. "Something I can't describe or explain." "It's a feeling," Zar added, trying to direct Ani toward a sense he knew she could relate to. Not of elation or foreboding, yet not of status quo either. His voice adopted a slight echo as Kowani's perception wavered. "My absence was merely an effect of my own observations, to come to your point." He turned to face Ahsoka. "It is not a convergence." He addressed the thought in Ahsoka's mind. "It is as if the Force itself is reaching out." He paused again, his eyes mournful, "guiding us toward its needs." "A place?" Kowani interjected. Zar turned to face her. "Perhaps, perhaps not. That remains elusive." Ahsoka screwed up her face, Kowani understanding that the Togruta was extending her reach to its limits. Within seconds, her face contorted, expressing fear, Kowani thought. "It is in distress, as this galaxy is, yet it is something deeper. Something has happened, whether old or new, creating a void within the Force itself. A void it cannot penetrate." Ahsoka spoke slowly, trying to match words with feelings. "I don't understand," Kowani said in frustration. "Perhaps that isn't the point, Ani." Zar surprised them in response, and Ahsoka turned toward him. "Then what is, Zar?" Ahsoka asked, her tone uncharacteristically deep, almost portentous. The Zeltron rotated his head slowly to face her. "You already know the answer, Ahsoka. You do yourself no favor, nor the rest in your company, by refusing to face it." Kowani could only stare at both, clearly missing the point. She knew Ahsoka, despite her many virtues, remained purposefully silent on some matters that Zar was distinctly referring to. "At what point is trust earned, Ahsoka?" she said with slight hesitation. Ahsoka bowed her head. "The Force flows through me freely, yet I deny myself its embrace in its entirety." Kowani became more agitated by the second, and Zar picked up the somatic clues, outlining, "Ani, there is no peace when one is not willing to forgive themselves." Ahsoka turned her expression inward, lowering her brow even further. Kowani opened her mouth to speak, but could only stare at the Togruta. In what? Sorrow? Pity? Those sentiments require context. Bewilderment was a better fit. It is a conglomeration of ineffectiveness stemming back decades. Anakin, his son, Ezra, the loss of Obi-Wan. Yes, I faced each of them in turn, but to say I've moved past them all completely is a lie. Annie, she has known nothing but conflict her entire life. It is not just some form of inner turmoil, mind you. I have spoken of galactic war since she was a youngling. Ahsoka struggles with defining who she is because there is no template for comparison. She would love nothing more to embrace ambivalence, but that is not in her nature. So she fights it, or more accurately, it fights her. Zar spoke Ahsoka's thoughts, the unspoken words she couldn't even put together if she wanted to share them. Kowani was beginning to understand the dilemma from her perspective, a point of view that was not her own, yet common sense would not be denied. Why fight it at all? You are who you are, Ahsoka. Nobody gets to decide who that is except you. Nobody. Ahsoka lifted her chin, a sly grin pulling at the corners of her lips. This is why I asked you to take the lead. My sight is clouded, not through the Force, mind you, but internally. She paused as she looked at Kowani, seeing confusion dissipating but sorrow taking its place. Do you remember our conversation with Master Yoda? Kowani couldn't hide her smile, even in ethereal form. Of course I do. His comments regarding the father have been on my mind lately, Ahsoka responded, her brow furrowing in thought. At the time, I understood his inference. However, I feel it has taken on more meaning than I had ever thought. Do you know of Bendu? Ahsoka asked. Kowani felt as though she were a child listening to playful stories atop her mother's lap. She could only shake her head from side to side. Who is Bendu? She asked. Bendu is not a he or she, more of a them. It is a collective consciousness centered on incongruity. They guide the Force through action, but in most cases, non-action. They are neither living nor dead, she said, turning slightly to nod toward Zar. The Bendu collaborate on what must be done to further the progression of time, facilitate a natural order, in other words. We leave what should or should not be done for the Force itself to toil with, Zar added, turning his head upward. Ahsoka is non-committal in her stance on the matter, and is thus in turmoil. Kowani stewed them with glaring eyes, her mind only partially comprehending, warring with her heart and soul for clarification. Why must she choose anything? Her life is her own. Agreed, Zar said immediately, turning toward Ahsoka once again. As I've counseled from the beginning. Ahsoka turned from them both, staring blankly out into nothingness. The choice will always be yours, Ahsoka. Bring closure to your strife and let your past go. The boy is not your responsibility. Zar's words were heartfelt and passionate. Kowani looked at him. Ezra? Luke, Ahsoka said, gathering their attention. Kowani's eyes shot open in plain surprise. They had spoken little of Anakin's son since Dagobah. You've been carrying that with you this whole time? She said, the look of shock dissipating and transferring to compassion and understanding. Ahsoka swung her gaze toward them both again. Yes, because there was nothing more to add. Ezra is a promise I intend to fulfill. Luke is a promise I feel I should have made. Ahsoka, you are not Bendu. You will never be Bendu, Zar whispered before them. I am not Jedi, nor Sith either, am I, Zar? She replied, her tone somewhat bitter and pointed. Why does that matter? Kowani interrupted. Ahsoka sighed heavily. Ani, I am finding it difficult to determine my purpose, to be honest. We can delay and undermine the Empire for only so long. They will discover Echo Base at some point, no matter how much would divert their gaze from it. Ezra isn't enough? We aren't enough? Kowani asked, the spark of anger beginning to take hold. You speak of being clouded, so find your clarity. You don't owe anyone anything, Ahsoka. That is the lesson you need to learn. Ahsoka swiveled again to face Zar, finding him nodding in agreement with the Mirialan. Sometimes, Kowani began again, then paused. Depth isn't the answer when simplicity is ignored outright. Without warning, Zar turned his head as if searching for some distant shout. Without explanation, he suddenly fired to his feet and tilted his head, which took both Ahsoka and Kowani by surprise. She has awoken. Ahsoka and Kowani continued staring at the Zeltran, waiting for something more elaborate. That's cryptic, Kowani finally said after a few moments. My observations were warranted. Something is happening, he said. Not much better, Ahsoka chimed in. Zar quickly spun to face them both, the movement so fluid it seemed to have not happened at all. We must go to Ambria. Kowani turned her own gaze to Ahsoka, finding the Togruta meeting her halfway. Ambria? Why? They both converged on the question simultaneously. Someone has awoken Zana, Zar said, but neither could determine if the missive was righteous or a portent of doom. Kalla rested her hand upon Conda's knee, surprising him as she leaned closer to whisper in his ear. You are Imperial. Conda thought her thick fingers felt oddly warm and almost inviting as he processed the comment. Was, because nothing more was warranted. Many of those were here, she said in return, her accented basic tone almost melodic to his ears. Conda scanned his surroundings slowly and methodically, seeing the same gleeful expressions as before, but focusing on their owners a little deeper. A human male with short brown hair was held tightly about her back by large male Deveronian hands. Interlocked hands between an Aqualish couple, their offspring lying on their respective laps. A small calyx pup curled up close to the youngling's chest. Numerous Twi'lek and human couples of varying genders, their children playing hand games with each other as they counted out taps against their legs and proffered hands to be slapped by one another. The scene was the same wherever he looked. He turned his gaze to Kalla beside him, leaning closer as he did so. Where are we going? Conda had never heard genuine Iktotchi laughter before. He surmised the most comparable sound he could compare it to was the mating calls of male sprig boars on his native Toprawa. The sound almost offended his ears, but he stifled his reaction enough to bypass embarrassment. Kalla drew in deep breaths as the last laughter subsided. She began, motioning toward the others in the cargo hold. We are headed for our next home. Her grin was authentic as she mouthed, You, she paused again, lifting her fingers from his knee to point at his chest. We'll need to speak with Vasi before you go anywhere. Conda wasn't sure how to feel about that. Her comment was phrased bluntly, with no inflections or pause of tongue to eschew doubt in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about how much he had enjoyed her hand on his knee and missed its absence. How stupid, he thought to himself. He wanted to press the avenue of questions further, formulate his understanding, and continue hearing her exotic accent. How very stupid, Conda, he thought again to himself. He felt her arm move next to him and dropped his gaze involuntarily, seeing her hand dive into a well-worn leather pouch cinched around her waist. What is that? He asked to divert his obtuse thoughts. Kalla looked toward him, seeing his own eyes fixated on her waist. She smiled briefly. It is Iktotchi. Conda lifted his gaze to look into her deep brown eyes. We take our home with us, she smiled again, and turned her attention to the top of Katu's head, pressing her chin into his hair as he slept in her lap. Conda watched the two momentarily before scanning the cargo hold again, this time looking for other Iktotchi. There was more than he had anticipated as he surveyed the hold, each hunched over in meditative rest or slumber. The ones he could see each had a hand in a similar leather pouch, their hands making small movements within. His mind was reeling as his subconscious began sending multiple reminders that his body was nearing its limits of functionality despite wanting to keep Kalla talking to him. He closed his eyes finally and let his mind create its own image of his surroundings as he felt the muscles in his body give way to relaxation. Without thinking through the process, he rested his hand over the pouch at Kalla's side, feeling her hand relax under pressure. He pressed his head against the wall plating and sidled his backside further down to get himself more comfortable. He felt her hand withdraw from the pouch, and its warmth once again consumed him as Kalla placed it over his, slowly rubbing the powdery substance from within the pouch into the light brown skin of his hand. He did not protest. Conda woke to silence, opening his eyes slowly to find himself the lone passenger in the cargo hold. Everything looked the same as he cast furtive glances in all directions, except for the lack of passengers. He moved to stand, feeling an intense protest from his muscles. A quick reflexive glance toward the offending parties told him his pack was missing. Forgetting the pain and shaking through the grogginess, he fumbled all about himself for the item to no avail. Relax, human, your items will be returned to you, a masculine voice informed him. Conda looked around to locate its source. A pair of heavy boots were descending an access ladder from the levels above as three of the Iktotchi strode in from an access hatch at the fore of the cargo hold. They assembled at the foot of the ladder as a heavily cloaked figure reached the deck plating with a thud. You are safe here, the figure said, turning to face him. Conda's mind raced. Fight was not an option, nor was flight, and diplomacy was not his forte. He decided to do the listening for the time being. Your hesitation is warranted, human. However, I assure you, there is no safer place in the galaxy. The figure continued speaking as it strode closer to where Conda knelt, the Iktotchi in tow. Conda felt the hesitation the voice spoke of, but for lack of context, if nothing else, and the assurances of safety even less so. Where's my pack, was all he could muster. The figure was a meter away from him when it stopped and seated itself on the floor, with a mild grunt of exertion. Conda watched warily as the figure raised its arms to remove the deep cowl crowning its head. As it pulled back, a man's chin greeted Conda, the same color as his own skin, a smile already present. Complete removal of the cowl unveiled dark coils of hair, lined with streaks of gray framing the brown skin of the man's face, his dark eyes underlined by a yellow tattoo. Kifu? Kondo thought. The wrinkles at the man's brow and crow's feet at the corners of his eyes spoke of his age, but the man emanated a youthful exuberance through expression alone. Your items have not been disturbed. They were only sequestered until we could explore them together, the man said. What the hell does that mean? Conda thought to himself. Where is Kalla? The man before him smiled brightly as he half turned behind him. I am here. Kalla's familiar voice came from the same access hatch where the other Iktotchi had emerged. Conda looked past the man toward the one visage of familiarity he could relate to. He felt his heart surge and his nerves calm as she approached their position, his pack slung over her shoulder. So happy to see me? She said as she fell to both knees between the two men, a playful smile stretching across her face as she gazed into his eyes. Conda rebuked externally, not wanting to give affection credence under the scrutiny of so many. Internally, however, he smiled broadly, finding her expression soothing, for lack of a better term. Her dark eyes were a mystery to him, one that he would give himself to fully in exploration. Her cranial horns exotic like her accent. He did his best to shake off the nonsense inside. He knew it wasn't helping his present situation. The man coughed subtly to get Conda's attention as he reached for the pack in Kalla's grasp. Conda felt a rush of embarrassment flush through his cheeks as it had registered that his internal stewing was clearly having outward effects. My name is Quinlan Vos. What is yours, Toprawan? The man said. Quinlan Vos. Quinlan Vos? The name was familiar to Conda, although he couldn't place it. Conda. Just Conda? Vos asked. No, Conda thought. Yes, he replied. Vos only harumphed into his chest, knowing full well Conda was all he would learn. Have you ever heard of retrocognition? Conda's blank stare told him all he needed to know. Conda, Vos began, I was once a Jedi. For some reason, Conda knew that already. The hints and details dropped from Katu notwithstanding, it was knowledge on a deeper level that told him as much. He could not explain how or even why he felt that he already knew, he just did. As you were once Imperial, Vos continued. Conda's gaze shifted from the aged Kefar to Kalla to communicate betrayal, yet her smile erased all thoughts of subterfuge. Yes, Conda, Kalla informed me, but came immediately to your defense with her premonitions. What in the stars is happening, Conda thought. Premonitions? Retrocogn... That word you said. Where is this going? He blankly thought about asking them to take him home to Toprawa, realizing how egregious the action and statement would sound. Iktotchi have a gift for premonitions, cognitive abilities that allow them to see into the future with limitations. I can see into the past. Do you see where this is going? Vos replied. After the explanation, Conda fully understood his immediate future and the bigger picture. You would be one step ahead of, well, everyone. Vos flicked another smile across his face, the act pulling up tiny wrinkles at his eyes playfully. The image reminded Conda of his father's brother, his favorite uncle with whom they would explore the forest back home together. That's the idea, anyway. It has met with favorable success, Vos said through a genuine expression, turning slightly to the three strangers. This is Chalma, he continued with an open hand toward the first of the three Iktotchi newcomers, Holda and Broctu. He finished, pointing out the trio. All of them women. Conda simply raised a hand of recognition to them, wishing they could just come to the damn point. We ask that you remove the items from the pack and hand them to us, Vos continued. Do so in a random manner, Conda, Kalla said to him gently. At last, progress, Conda thought as he took the pack from her grasp and darted a hand inside. His eyes still fixated on Kalla's. The immediate crunch of the thermal blanket greeted him. All the items? He asked, wondering how long it would take if that were the case. Only the ones you choose to share, Conda, Kalla answered. He felt some relief from that, trying to keep himself from swallowing hard, knowing full well the lightsaber was just under his fingertips. He fished around for it for the time being, clamping his hand around the black undersuit gloves and helmet clip of his recent past. He withdrew the items with genuine hesitation, realizing he was the only one who expressed any surprise. How odd the adornments of an Imperial trooper seemed in his hands now. How useless the clip was. How uniform the gloves had been. He passed them without thinking about them for too long into the outstretched hands of Quinlan Vos, watching as the man closed his eyes in stern concentration. Several nods and a follow-up grimace, accented with an audible groan, grabbed Conda's attention. Vos opened his eyes to stare deeply into Conda's. What you've been through, the actions you felt you had to take. I feel for you, Conda. Those decisions would have rocked the Jedi to their foundations ages past, Vos said, gently placing the items on the deck plating before reaching for Conda's hands. Conda stared at the man as his comments hit home, stirring those past actions to the forefront of his thought. Was this the point, then, to make him relive his nightmares? Kalla could sense the tension within the man, moving closer to close her hand around his shoulder. You see, Conda, your future is in your own hands, despite the four of us deciphering multiple paths it could take, Kalla began gently. We have conferred, and with Vos's blessing, offer you a place among us. We are farmers, Conda, nothing more, but our efforts extend beyond our own immediate needs. Many rely on what we accomplish through our efforts. You bring a unique skill set to that equation, but only if that is your will, she finished. He didn't sense or infer any feeling of motivation or manipulation on her part, as her harmonic accent echoed through his mind, only that of a kinship he felt himself. You've been removed unwillingly from a family you may or may not see again, Conda, Vos interjected plainly. What we have here is another chance at that for you, for all of us, in fact. Conda immediately understood that the man was referencing Toprawa. What I've been able to see through your offering is simply the path of a man who had no choices. You have that freedom now. Vos continued and moved fluidly to bring himself to his feet. He turned to leave the way he had come, but stopped after a few steps and half-turned behind him. Although I profess not to know what one is, Kalla here insists that we would benefit from having an ecological biologist in our midst, his voice teeming with humor, but genuine nonetheless. Conda speared Kalla with his gaze, only to find her smile, that damn smile of hers again, shattering any pretensions he had ready to unload. With a sigh of resignation, he pushed himself off the deck plating, doing his best to mitigate his smile that threatened to betray his ambivalent intentions. Wait, he called out to the departing Quinlan Vos, cramming his hand back into the pack and wrapping it around the bound leather. Here, he extended the item in his grasp. Vos closed the distance between them with deliberate steps, eyes on the leather bundle. He hesitantly reached out to trace his fingers over the leather straps, relying on Conda to hold the actual item for the time being. Conda watched as Vos closed his eyes and then contorted his face into a haze of expression, settling on a gentle smile once again, pulling on the corners of his lips. One clever Togruta, the man said, blowing out a breath and raising his free hand to grasp the item with both hands. Conda looked to the assembled Iktotchi as they maneuvered into position around the Kefar, all sharing glances, grimaces, and shocked expressions. With a nod from the quartet, Quinlan Vos unwrapped the saber from its leather bindings and let it roll into the flesh of his palm. The man dropped to a knee and let forth an anguished gasp as if the saber hilt were in fire in his hands. Conda heard the torment in the Kifar's cry echoing throughout the cargo hold. The Iktotchi conjoined themselves around the man, placing a hand on the one next to them and a hand on Vos's shoulder, and began to wail their somber lament. Conda was at a loss to explain what he was witnessing, the forces and powers at work beyond his comprehension. Just as suddenly as the audio assault had begun, it ended. Vos was on both knees, clutching at his chest, the Iktotchi in various stances of complete exhaustion. Conda looked to Kalla, breathing heavily, and raced to her side, placing his head under the arm she had splayed for support. He pushed up with his strained legs, taking on her full weight in support as her head lolled to rest on his shoulder. She raised her hand to cup his cheek and tilted her head back to look into his eyes. "What just happened? Are you okay?" he said frantically. "Will be," she said slowly between breaths. He gently placed his free hand on the side of her head, pressing it back down onto his shoulder. "Shh, shh, I've got you," he found himself saying, realizing only then that his actions had been born from instinct and reaction rather than thought. "What the hell am I doing?" he asked himself as he felt her take him up on his offer, pressing her full weight into him. Conda, assured that Kalla would be fine, looked to the others, Vos in particular, as the Kifar had his gaze trained on him. "Vos, what just happened? What did you see?" he asked, looking into the vacuum of Vos's gaze. Vos continued staring at him without uttering a word, inhaling ragged breaths, a slight line of drool slipping from the corner of his mouth. Vos lifted an arm with a trembling hand to wipe it away. "Truth." That was all he managed to say.